The following programming is made possible through a generous donation from Randall Lewis, Executive Vice President of Upland-based Lewis Operating Companies, and by the Alltech Media Group, the region's leading multimedia video production and marketing company, creating powerful and innovative marketing strategies that deliver exponential returns, and by StudioCast Pros, engaging your audience, elevating your brand, and enhancing your profits with professional quality e-learning, webcasts, and podcasts that stand out from the competition.
This is a series of seminars, report out from the Randall Lewis Seminar Series, hosted by the Center for Sustainable Suburban Development. Name is Ron Loveridge. I'm the director of the center. We held a really fascinating panel discussion on May 27th. Title was Water, Impact of the Drought and the New Regulations on Inland Southern California. There were 4 people who participated in the panel, Joe Grindstaff, John Rossi, and then 2 others who are not here today. You could tell it in the questions that people who were listening, and I think this is not simply kind of an interesting topic, but a topic central now to what is taking place in terms of lifestyle and economy and choices for this region. I guess the first question really is, what's the problem? I mean, my wife Fonda came back from 2 weeks in Mammoth. There is no snowpack. Streams are much less than I ever have any past memory of. What's the problem in California? The 4th consecutive year of drought. There's no water coming from Owens Valley, I guess, any longer. Mona Lake, when we were up there, talked about a near crisis stage in terms of its levels. How serious is the drought, the water problem facing the state?
Well, I think that it's serious, and it's a crisis, especially if you're a farmer and your livelihood's going away. I think you would define that as a crisis, and unfortunately in California we may have 10 or 20% of our irrigated farmland that doesn't have water. That's a crisis for the state, and especially for the people that live there. So I think it's also a turning point and an opportunity. It's a time to realize there's not enough water to do everything, or at least there's not enough cheap water to do everything. And we have the opportunity to kind of figure out what are we willing to pay, what are our priorities, how are we going to allocate the water resources that we have.
John, when somebody who gets something in the mail telling them what they need to do to reduce water consumption, they say, what's the problem? What answer do you give them?
Well, we talk about in Southern California urban use that we have to move the water from great distances to get it here. The local groundwater, the local water resources have been spoken for decades now. And as Southern California and the state grew in population, we now move water from the Colorado River or from the Bay Delta, now being over the last 6 or 7 decades. But populations have changed. When those systems went in the 1920s and 30s for the Colorado River and the 60s and 70s for the state project, we had half the population. So we have to move water great distances, and without that snowpack, that water isn't there to be moved here. So we have a lot less water to wash our clothes and to water our lawns than we had previously.
Could you talk a little bit about how water is delivered and the kind of complexity of how we organize water delivery in California?
When you think about the infrastructure systems that are in place, most of that water delivery systems were homegrown. So City of Riverside, for example, some smart folks 100 years ago went and built facilities up in San Bernardino where water coming down out of the San Bernardino mountains was plentiful at the time. They needed water for citrus. And so those systems have developed over time, but there's a third dimension to water. We can run electrical wires up and over mountains, but with water being heavy, the infrastructure cost and the pumping costs are very significant. So really, as the urban development and population expanded, we started interconnecting these systems, but it's expensive. But I do agree, most people I think take it for granted and enjoy getting into high school classes, for example, or even elementary school and asking kids, where does water come from? And that's the answer you get, the tap. Well, how does it get to the tap? And a lot of people aren't aware of that, but there's a lot of infrastructure behind it.
Yeah, I read several articles that maybe the California infrastructure is a world best practice in terms of its delivery of water to so many people.
I think it is, actually. When I was at the Department of Water Resources, we had people from all over the world that would come and look at our system to see what we were doing and how we managed to make the system work. And there are limitations, as we're facing right now, but it's been an incredible system for a long time. And in spite of population, today we use about the same amount of water as we did 20 years ago, maybe even slightly less in Southern California. And that's because we've become better at managing those resources. And I don't think the future will change that much. We're going to get better using those resources.
If you ask people on the street what the Inland Empire Utilities Agency is, probably not many will give a good answer. What is the Inland Empire Utilities?
I'd be astounded if more than 1 in 10,000 actually knew what we are. We're actually a water wholesaler. We are a member agency of Metropolitan Water District, and we cover the region really from Fontana and Cucamonga and San Bernardino County all the way to the county line with Los Angeles. So we have about 850, 900,000 people in our service area. We wholesale water in. We also do recycled water, and we deal with wastewater. We're the regional wastewater provider, and so water resource management in a broader sense is what we do. And we have member agencies that actually deal with the customer, that are the retailers that deal one-on-one with the customers.
Retail agencies are ones that are really kind of in the spotlight. Western Municipal District, what is it?
You know, we were formed in 1954, a vote of the citizens in the area to bring imported water in and become a member of Metropolitan Water District as well. So we started as a wholesale water agency. And in the 60s, the city, it was an inquiry of residents up on the plateau that we serve around Lake Matthews. How do we get water? And the city had decided not to build up the hill. They agreed with Western, and Western took on a retail role as well, and now serve about 22,000 connections. But the wholesale area running from Jurupa, Norco, Corona, down the 15 freeway through Elsinore, Marietta, and Temecula, and then back up the 215 freeway. That's about 500 square miles, and almost 1 million people live in that area as well. But again, as Joe said, some of them are served, most of them are served by other retail or cities or water districts.
Could you talk a little bit about your relationship to the Metropolitan Water District? Because I think people understand there's this large district, particularly in terms of capital investment, but what's your relationship to the Metropolitan Water District?
Well, we're a member agency of Metropolitan. Metropolitan was...
How many agencies are
there are about 25 agencies that cover all of Southern California, and so they have about 20 million people that live in urban Southern California, and they are the import agency that brings water in from Northern California and from the Colorado River. And because we're such a large region, they couldn't deal with every city in Southern California being a member agency, and so we formed wholesale agencies that were intermediate agencies, if you will, and both of our agencies fit into that category.
And Western, 25, 26 agencies moving that water into the region. But I think what's fascinating about Met is their infrastructure and their policy development really is central to Southern California. They really speak for Southern California as it goes to the state water policy issues. Our director serves on that board now, Don Galliano. We also have Randy Record from Eastern Municipal Water District is the current chair of MET, so it's great to have a little more of an inland empire focus, not focus, but his experiences in both agriculture and urban as a chair on the board is helpful too.
Water infrastructure has been helped greatly, right, by Metropolitan Water District's ability to fund major projects.
When you think about 26 counties, right, Ventura to San Diego, as Joe mentioned, approximately 20 million people, they fund things in what we call maybe a postage stamp rate. In other words, the funding and purchasing power of the water customers in all of Southern California gives Met the ability to build infrastructure for the long term. And I don't know how many thousands of miles of pipe and reservoirs and treatment plants. I think 3 of the top 10 sized treatment plants in the country are owned here by Metropolitan Water District.
So, and it's not just that they have the money and they're able to build things, it's also that they're able to integrate across boundaries, and we can synergize in some ways. When Western needs more water, they can take more water and we can take less, and having a regional agency like Metropolitan lets us all work together cooperatively to make the whole of Southern California stronger.
Share water and financial resources.
Absolutely.
And so there are a lot of different water districts. I mean, also in retail, Metropolitan is sort of an umbrella agency which allows for coordination, cooperation. Is that?
Absolutely.
And one of the challenges on water is that complexity. So in our Western service territory, there's our retail and 7 other agencies. Eastern's almost the entire provider within their area, for example. How many retail agencies do you have?
We have 7 retail agencies in our area.
So there's kind of a Met to the wholesaler to the retailer. It's a lot of complexity.
Well, what has really put water, besides the drought, is now the kind of state call coming from the governor that the State Water Quality Board has put into regulation of reducing urban water use by what, 25%? Is that the
statewide target?
Statewide target. That's a pretty big number. What are you doing with this, and how successful are you so far in answering this call?
Well, the number varies depending on hydrology. I think we're getting better at conserving more and reducing water use, and we're next week going to actually have a report based on the governor's 25% call. My expectation is we won't quite meet that now, but he didn't set the standard and say you have to meet it immediately. What he did was say over the next 9 months, the amount of water that you use in total should be 25% less. So I think all of our agencies, everybody in Southern California and everybody throughout the state is working to meet that target.
In answering your question, how are we doing? The governor set a goal, and the State Water Resources Control Board looked at each agency's water use and gave us individual targets. So in our case, we need to do 32%,
which is pretty high. Using
more water in the Inland Empire, and have some questions about that. But to answer your question, I was mentioning starting early, and one of the challenges, some of the early adoption of water conservation wasn't necessarily recognized. They gave us some new targets. Well, those new targets are real and they're important. We all have to do our part. We have a real crisis here. So Western jumped in with both feet, and with our billing rate structure, we give people budgets every month, and many have already stepped up, and we're further reducing those budgets to get to that 32%. So we had a good month in May, to answer your question, but our real changes and further encouragements to customers and other tools really don't begin until June. So I think that the numbers we're going to see in July and August are going to give us a better idea.
City of Riverside, which I represented for some 33 years, has sued the state, one of the few water agencies to sue the state over its, I guess they were requesting 4% rather than 32%, is that what?
28, I think was there.
28. What's the nature of this suit that the City of Riverside is bringing against the state water?
My perspective is that basin, as well as all of the groundwater basins in this region, are at their lowest points ever, at least in the last 50 or 60 years. And so I'm not sure that it makes sense to challenge. Although what Riverside says is, hey, we're 100% dependent on this and we're not interconnected with the state system. I think the state's perspective is, actually state project water goes into that basin, and the basin is at a really low level, and if the drought continues, certainly we're going to be putting more water into that basin, and therefore you as a part of the state need to participate.
The mayor of Riverside was, at least in the press enterprise, or I guess it was the LA Times story, says the basin was undiminished by the drought. Is that?
I don't think that's true. Just flat, I don't think that. I think every basin has had declines. John, you know more about Bunker Hill Basin.
Well, it is. The water levels are at the numbers when the judgment went in 1969. So they came up over the years and have gone back down to that level where they started. The reason they put the judgment in. So it's low. Yeah.
What percent of our water for the inland Southern California comes from that basin?
Well, how about for groundwater basins in general? It's probably 60%, I'd guess. Certainly, and we could make the argument most of our service area overlies the Chino Basin, another large groundwater basin, and there's a lot of water in that basin, and it's come down, but it's there's a lot of water there. Right. We could say, okay, we're just going to disconnect from the state project and not take imported water, but that's long-term, not a realistic answer. It's an integrated system.
There was an interesting article in the Los Angeles Times really talking about the Santa Ana Water Planning Project and the kind of coordination and cooperation, talking about the 96 miles of the Santa Ana River and how it is not just simply doing interesting things, but really in many ways is a national best practice. And I don't think people quite understand how integrated we now are in terms of working with this sort of watershed called Santa Ana watershed. Could you comment on that?
People don't naturally think of the Inland Empire in Orange County as this progressive leader, but for decades this region has been a leader in water resource management. The first brackish groundwater desalters designed to clean up water were developed here. The groundwater replenishment system in Orange County, the largest recycled water project in the world of its type, is state of the art, is here. We have had, rather than lawsuits, and we've had lawsuits in the past, we have amongst the parties been able to work out problems that were really, really difficult. And it's been challenging and hard work, but if you compare what's happening in this region with almost anywhere else in the state or in the nation, I think you'll find that it really is best practice. What we're doing sets the standard. In fact, some programs at the state, the Integrated Regional Water Management Program, was modeled on SAPA, and when I was at the state, people would talk about, well, we wish we had that kind of an organization, that kind of a working ethic in the rest of the state.
You always see the channels in Los Angeles River of water rushing out to the sea. Could you talk a little bit about the water the rain that comes or snow that comes from the top part of the San Bernardino Mountains, and when it finally finishes and goes into the Pacific Ocean, it's used multiple times, right? Santa Ana River is just not a flood control channel.
Absolutely, the Santa Ana River, and John Western was a part of helping to expand the flood control facility, Seven Oaks Dam, so it could also be used as a water capture facility. And people capture water, percolate it into the ground, use it, discharge it, recapture it again, reuse it, and typically I think we usually estimate that we use our water 3 times here. And
I think that's really an important concept. What do you mean 3 times?
So we use the water once after when it rains, and then we recycle it and use it a second time. And then we use it a third time. And now with the groundwater replenishment system in Orange County, it may be a fourth time, and it goes on. It just continues to go on. And what ultimately we will be in a place where we have discharge of salt to the ocean, where it naturally would go, and it won't harm the ecosystem there. And we'll have some ecosystem flows because we do have an ecosystem here as well.
Well, and unlike the Los Angeles River, you mentioned the Seven Oaks Dam, there's also the Prado Dam, so we have impoundment opportunities, but it's also mostly soft bottom. And other than very, very flashy peak flows that will get all the way to the ocean, Orange County Water District, after it's slowed down at Prado, recharges it in basins on and off the river all the way down the 91 into Huntington Beach. So that's that third capture. And then after Orange County uses it the third time, as you mentioned, they take it out of the wastewater plant, retreat it in the state of the art, we talked about GWRS, and pump it back to the groundwater the fourth time. So you don't see that in other watersheds.
I attended a recent conference. This is the watershed, and they were honoring somebody from Orange County, a district. I can't remember the person, but he described that in the past, he said he rarely came north, and if he did, he came with his lawyers to fight. But somehow, how do you explain the kind of coordination and cooperation that now exists in this Santa Ana watershed? I think it is a remarkable national story, and Western clearly is a major part of that.
Well, you see, 1969 was when the parties agreed, and then the court so ordered how we would all manage the Santa Ana River, and one of the aspects of that was to create SAPA. So SAPA then had the agencies and the elected officials from water agencies that were part of the war prior to that. Yeah. Now we're sitting down at least monthly, and how long has it been? I mean, that's some 50 years at that point. So it was probably slow going at the beginning, but that's why I think, again, we have the sophistication we have, because people decided it was better to find common interest and float everyone's boat rather than fight, and that's really been a great legacy.
I think one of the issues that people are most concerned about is what do I do? How can I be respectful and responsive? And a great deal of attention now is focused on obviously outdoor irrigation, particularly lawns. Walking around Mammoth, there are all kinds of signs around there say the brown is the new green. But I get my water from Western. What am I supposed to do?
Well, it's interesting. The retailers have different approaches. In our case, we have a rate structure system that gives you a budget so that you know exactly what your target is each month. We've reduced that target or that budget for the drought, so people know on each bill cycle how, what they're shooting for. In other areas that may not have that tool, we talk about really getting to know your garden, your lawn, moisture probes. You can see how much water you're applying. You can look at your irrigation system. But customers, as I mentioned earlier, getting to know their water usage to really understand what's happening. Do they have some wet spots on the lawn? At this point, everyone's lawn should look a little stressed. You should see a little brown, a little less green, but we have ways to help customers target their individual use, understand it better.
One of the issues that people have talked about is what does this mean for the future growth of this Southern California, particularly economic growth, whether it's residential or commercial or industrial. Could you comment on what this drought and these water restrictions mean now and likely mean in the future?
Well, on the retail level, talking about commercial, for example, we're very sensitive to indoor water use for producing products. Maybe it's from bottling water to manufacturing. That when we talk about these budget reductions, we asked those residential customers to reduce 10%, not the 30%, because we don't want to see, there's still some room for efficiency, but we don't want to see that bottom line impact jobs or their businesses. Now, of course, as they're using water outdoors in a landscape, they've got to reduce the same amount as everyone else.
Two kind of final questions. One, there's a lot of talk about looking at Australia as some sort of model, or for at least of what lessons do you draw from Australia that might be of value here in Southern California?
Well, I'll talk about a couple of lessons. One is we can do a lot more. We always talk about how hard it is here. Australia reduced their water use probably to 50% of where we're at, even if we meet the governor's mandate. So if you took the governor's mandate and then reduced another 50%, they reduced water use pretty much nationwide by that amount, and yet their society and their values remained the same. They had a really long, very deep drought. There was an impact on agriculture, but I think the Australian society is still efficient and effective. One of the other things I learned was how you respond is important. So there were some places I won't name names, but one of the states built what I think is the most beautiful seawater desalination plant, most beautiful water treatment plant I've ever seen. And incredibly well done, incredibly well designed, incredibly expensive, and never turned it on because the drought ended. And yet another state built smaller facilities that were not necessarily the prettiest, but were effective, and they're still working. They turned them on and they started running them and they integrated them into their system. And so for me, it was like, yes, big projects have a place, but probably you start incrementally doing things that make sense economically, even if the drought ends.
But one of the things that struck me, this was the year after the drought had ended, a 14-year drought. So you think about our 4 years.
Ours 4 years, theirs 14.
Right.
Okay.
And in that, they had to make dramatic changes, not only in the way they used water, but in water policy and water governance. They really took over at a national level and became much more of a top-down approach. And when we hear state officials, this is my opinion, talking about we need to be more like Australia, that worries a lot of water professionals because of the complexities of California and Southern California. But the experience I remember most was thinking, what a business model we have. We don't know from year to year what our inventory is to sell. So they made all these incredible investments. I mean, 20s of billions of dollars in these desalters, and I think four out of the 5 are off now, as you said. And yet that insurance policy, the rates went up. It was a financial impact, but those resources or insurance policies are there for the next drought, and that's going to be something I'm sure they'll use not too far down the road.
Well, let me just speak personally. I mean, I'm delighted that you two are here and in our region, and I think this is the familiar comment that crisis is also an opportunity, and I think water now is being understood in ways that in my lifetime I don't remember us. And thank you very much for being here and for this discussion. Thank you very much for what you do for us. And most of you both have boards, right? That if somebody wanted to come and speak to board members, or do you have newsletters? And
we do.
I think this is the time to engage water.
Absolutely.
This is the time to engage water. And but again, thank you for your really outstanding work in our region.
Appreciate being here. Thank you very much.
Right.
For information or questions about this program, to learn more about future programming planned for the Randall Lewis Seminar Series, or to register and or receive email announcements from UCR's Center for Sustainable Suburban Development, please contact the center at 951-827-7830 or email at shana.conaway@ucr.edu. This program is brought to you by the following proud sponsors: the Alltech Media Group, the region's leading multimedia video production and marketing company, creating powerful and innovative marketing strategies that deliver exponential returns. And by StudioCast Pros, engaging your audience, elevating your brand, and enhancing your profits with professional quality e-learning, webcasts, and podcasts that stand out from the competition.